Dr. Roshni Patel is Chief of Pediatrics with Community Health Centers Incorporated, a federally qualified health center that provides quality and compassionate primary health care services to nearly 70,000 insured, uninsured, underinsured, and underserved children and adults throughout Central Florida. Dr. A.J. Marsden is a former U.S. Army surgical nurse who now serves as an associate professor of psychology and human services at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. Dr. Marsha Glines is an adjunct professor in the Department of Education at Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts, and a learning specialist at the Children's Center for Psychiatry, Psychology, and Related Services in Delray Beach, Florida. Glines also is the creator of the nationally recognized Institute for Achievement in Learning at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida, and the founding president of Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, the nation's first accredited college or university dedicated to educating neurodivergent students with learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, and other learning differences. So we're going to start our conversation this morning with Dr. Patel. Many parents fear labeling their child when they're diagnosed with learning disabilities. What advice would you give them?
I think you have to look at it not so much as a label, but the diagnosis is extremely important, especially for insurance purposes. You need that diagnosis to get the proper therapies, to get the additional help that you need. A lot of schools also require the diagnosis for the IEP, which is the Individual Education Plan. So I wouldn't think of it, labeling, because that kind of seems like we're singling them out, but you need that diagnosis so you can get the necessary services.
Well, what are some consequences for children who aren't properly informed by their parents about their learning disability?
I think not telling a child about their neurodivergence can lead to a lot of confusion. It leaves the child to be feeling alone, that maybe they're the only ones experiencing this or the only one having trouble in school, when in reality, that's not the case. So to kind of quell their fears, to kind of make them feel a little bit better, I think it's really important for the parent to explain what the neurodivergence is and what it isn't, so that they have a better understanding.
Thank you. But Dr. Marsden, why is it that these conversations often prove so difficult for parents to have with their kids?
That's a great question, Daryl. I think the main reason is, first of all, they don't know very much about it themselves, right? A lot of times these diagnoses, they kind of come out of nowhere. Sometimes they knew that their child was struggling. Now they have this diagnosis of dyslexia, but what does that mean exactly? So first and foremost, parents, before they can kind of have that conversation with their child, they need to understand, what is dyslexia? What are the things that go along with it? What are some of the characteristics of it? How can they help their child, right? What are the accommodations that he or she needs? So that's the first thing that they can do before they even have this conversation. Educate themselves, understand that you don't know very much about it, and that's okay. This is a great opportunity for you to learn, and in the process of you learning about it, bring your child along for the ride, right? Learn together about what it is, what they need, their accommodations, all of those things, and then together they can tackle this problem. So it will be a difficult conversation, but it's also a great opportunity to learn more about the diagnosis and to use it as like almost a bonding journey with your son or daughter as you go through this together.
All right, thank you. Well, Dr. Glines, what are some ways that parents can help their children develop the skills they need to navigate the academic and social world as they grow older?
I think one of the things we have to consider when we talk about the challenges is that in addition to the learning challenges and the social challenges, something like 40 million children in this country have experienced some form of trauma, and trauma can be social media bullying. It can be a medical issue. So one of the things as parents we have to think about very seriously is building resilience, helping our children build a sense of resiliency. Some of that comes from finding anchors, as James Garbarino speaks about in his book, about every child needing an anchor. It can be a therapeutic anchor, an educational anchor, it can be a coach, it can be a spiritual anchor, but to help build trust, which is how we build resiliency. So anytime any of those anchors can be identified and used, helps parents with that sense of building resiliency. And I just think that's one of the most important things. The other is a simple equation. If you think, if we help children understand why, that is a belief or an idea that leads to how we're going to figure something out, and then the what the outcome is. It's a very simple equation to help conversations begin with: why is something happening? How are we going to handle it? And what's the outcome? And I think those are just a couple strategies.
All right, thank you. So Dr. Patel, the first physician that most children see outside of the delivery room is a pediatrician. Can you tell me about what role pediatricians play in the development of neurodivergent children?
Yes, pediatricians play an extremely important role because they aid in the early detection of neurodivergent patients. So if you think about it, by the time a child is 2 years old, they've had at least 10 well checkups. And then starting at the age of 3, they have a yearly checkup. So it's during these routine well child checks that the pediatrician is able to determine, are there any developmental delays? Is the child not meeting their milestones in some way? We have a lot of parents that tell us, they just seem to take so long completing their homework, or we're just struggling in math or reading or writing. Or the teacher is always complaining that, they're bouncing around, they're just not able to sit still. So with this, the pediatrician can then make the referral, and it's the referral that allows us to get the proper evaluation done. So then we can come to a diagnosis.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Marsden, not every child receives a diagnosis of neurodivergence at an early age when they're babies or toddlers or whatnot. So, how can parents explain in a age-appropriate and easy-to-understand way that their child has learning disabilities and what it means when the child is in early childhood, ages 0 to 5, and middle childhood, 6 to 11?
Well, Daryl, it really does depend on their age, the way that you approach the question. But in every instance, no matter how old they are, first and foremost, you'll have to explain to them, okay, this is what your learning disability is. This is the diagnosis. And chances are they're going to come home some days and they're going to feel like they're just not good enough, that they're dumb, that they're stupid. And this is really negative thinking. So first and foremost, just explain to them, yes, you're going to have bad days, right? And that's okay. The reason why you have bad days is because you learn differently from other people. So no matter how old they are, that can be the first thing that you try to explain to them. You just learn differently from other people, and that's okay. Everybody is different. Everybody needs help in different ways. So you could say, Daddy, for example, right, he needs to wear glasses because he needs help to see. And Grandma, she's really short, so she needs a step stool because she needs help to reach things that are on high shelves, right? You need help because you learn differently from other people. So you need extra help in this particular way. So explaining to them that they learn differently and that's okay is appropriate at every single level, right? As they get older, now you can start to get a little bit more specific. What are the accommodations that you'll need in order to succeed? Have conversations with them. Ask them, okay, did you try this accommodation? Did it work for you? Did it not work for you? Why do you feel like it didn't work for you? And then as they get older, you can get into more details about how their brain works differently, how their brain uses different sections or different lobes to overcome some of the issues that they're having. You can dive deeper into those accommodations, look at different techniques, and really try to understand, okay, this is the learning disability. How can we work around it in order to succeed?
All right, thank you. So Dr. Glines, as a child grows older, the pressures and the responsibilities that they have change. So how do you tailor this approach of discussing and having these conversations about learning disabilities with children who are in the preteen years and later in their adolescent years?
Well, one of the things that happens, of course, for all of us as parents who have raised teenagers is that we have this whole the production of new hormones and new neurotransmitters, and so there's so much going on in our kids' brains that I think it's important for them to have a voice and understand what that all means and what's happening to them from a physiological perspective. I think that we sometimes underestimate how important it is for our neurodivergent children to how we underestimate how important it is for them to understand what's going on from a physiological and a neurological perspective. I also think, sometimes we see a lot of impulsivity, and I always tell parents, don't take it all personally if you can help it. It's not all personal, although it feels that way. That impulsivity and those decision makings, because our braking mechanism in the frontal lobe is just not functioning quite yet from a maturity perspective. So I think that to help kids understand the whole fight, flight, and then that other option, which is to freeze for a moment when they're in situations that are difficult for them to handle, that's really an important lesson. I think helping them have a voice, I think helping them understand what's going on from a physiological perspective, and having conversations about that, which is what my fellow panelists have spoken about. I think that's critically important.
All right. Dr. Patel, as these children are growing up and they're dealing with the reality of having learning disabilities, what are some of the common emotions that they tend to experience, and how can parents help them deal with these emotions in a supportive way?
Mm-hmm. I think in the office, the most common emotions we encounter are frustration, anger. I have a lot of parents that, talk to me about how their child's just acting out. And I think, again, like we discussed before, it's a lot of confusion. They just don't understand why it takes them longer to learn something, why they don't pick up material like other kids do, or they can't do something the exact same way another child can. And a lot of it, there's embarrassment as well. They, sometimes feel they're the only ones going through this, that they're the only ones that, might not be able to learn the material like everyone else. So I think it's really important for parents to talk to their children that, again, this is just a different way that you learn material. It doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean, that you're, different from other kids. And so, just talking to them, I think that's the really important part.
All right. Well, Dr. Marsden, we've touched on this a little bit through this conversation, but can you drill down on this for us a little bit about what are some of the common misconceptions about learning disabilities that are out there and that parents should definitely address with their children?
Just like Dr. Patel was saying, they are going to have those days where they feel like, I'm not good at this, I'm stupid, I'm not worthy. And that's something that we have to nip in the bud right away, those negative thoughts, because ultimately over a long period of time, that negatively affects their self-esteem, their self-confidence, their self-worth, and that's not good. So first and foremost, yes, they struggle with things, and it's important for us to tell them that they will struggle with this and they will struggle with it for the rest of their lives, right? But they are not stupid. They are smart in their own way. Everybody has that one thing that they're really good at. They just need to find that thing that they're smart at. So the first misconception is that a learning disability is an intellectual disability, and they are not. They are very, very different. So that's the first misconception, the first myth that we need to get rid of right away. The second myth that I hear a lot, even from parents and from other teachers and things like that, is that students with learning disabilities are lazy, right? They just don't try hard enough. If they would put in more effort, they could just do the work. And this is actually a very harmful misconception, a very harmful myth, because it hurts the students. Again, it causes them to feel like, well, apparently I'm just not trying hard enough. I'm not good enough, right? So it negatively affects their feelings of self-confidence, self-efficacy, and that's not good. It also leads to barriers and issues in the future. So if they feel like they're not good enough right now, that they're just not trying hard enough, and if they just tried a little bit harder, they'd be able to do it, that feeling is going to follow them the rest of their lives, and they're not going to find the accommodations that really do work for them, because they're not going to try new things. They're just going to say, oh, I'm just not trying hard enough. I'm just lazy. Lastly, a lot of them feel like, well, I have a learning disability, there's no hope for college, right? There's this myth that if you have a learning disability, there's no way you're going to get accepted into college. That's all I can say is Beacon College exists for a reason. Please come and see us. I would love to see your son or daughter at Beacon College. One other misconception that I kind of touched on earlier, but is important to note again, is a lot of people think that learning disability, is autism, for example, can be cured. If we would just find the right cure, they'd be normal. That, again, is very harmful to their self-esteem, their self-confidence. If you talk to individuals with autism, the first thing that they'll say is, there is nothing wrong with me. right? There's nothing wrong with me. I have autism, and that's okay. I learn differently, and that's okay. So we have to understand that trying to look for cures and try to cure them, again, is harmful for them in the long run because there's nothing wrong. Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you. So, Dr. Glines, can you give us some strategies that parents can use to actively involve their children in these conversations and to help them become active participants in their education?
I think I always like to leave parents with one concrete strategy to keep that conversation ongoing, because sometimes it can get a little dry and a little tedious, and sometimes our children don't want to hear it anymore. I think one of the best things, the best strategies that I've ever used and continue to use, even with my grad students, is to have students create vision boards, because vision boards will actually help them identify their strengths, their goals, their aspirations, and even their challenges. And they can cut out photos, or cut out pictures out of magazines. They can draw. They can put photos of family or of places they want to visit, of things they want to accomplish. A huge vision board is a great conversation piece without having to just use verbal language. So you bring out the vision board and say, let's look at what's happening here. And it can be updated and it can be replaced with things. And if our kids aren't interested in doing a vision board, then the whole family does vision boards. So we all have something visible to add to the verbal conversations that we want to keep going. And I found that that's really helpful. I think helping students take ownership of their goals and their beliefs and also taking ownership of their strengths and weaknesses is critically important. Having them find a voice when they are looking at post-secondary institutions, they need to be able to own their challenges and be able to articulate their strengths. And if they can remember that vision board that they can pull on as a reminder of ambition and of ability, I just think that that's really very, very important. It's a visual representation that adds to the language and the conversations.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Patel, we have a young family that walks into your office. They've just received a diagnosis of neurodivergence for their child. How do you help them understand, or help their child understand, rather, the implications of learning disabilities throughout their life at an early age?
So, kind of like my colleagues have touched on, it's really important to stress to the child that it's not that they're not smart, they just learn differently. So I think one of the most important things parents can do, as well as the pediatrician, is explain to the child that you still can have your dreams and your goals, and it's important to set those goals and try to achieve them. It's just that the path might look a little bit different. So it's really important for the parent to help that child navigate, well, what steps do we need to do differently? Are there extra classes that we need to do? What accommodations will we need? But that their goals and their dreams are still achievable. It's just going to look a little different in the path. I think, Dr. Glines touched on this, but creating a resilient child is extremely important. It's a lifelong skill that having that resilience early on, it's going to help them to become, successful adults. And I think for parents, just constantly being supportive, letting them know that, they don't feel any different about the child just because of their neurodivergent diagnosis. And it's important that, a lot of neurodivergent students, they have areas that they excel in. Some of them have, very good artistic skills or math skills. So highlighting the things that they're really good at and how can we, use those to our advantage.
All right. Well, Dr. Marsden, can you suggest some ways for us that parents and other adults in this child's life can help the conversation about learning disabilities be more inclusive and more positive, both in the home and in the broader community?
Great question, Daryl. And this can be difficult. I've noticed in my experience, whenever I've talked about teaching students with learning disabilities, oftentimes I get, oh my goodness, good for you. That must be really difficult. Or it takes a really special person to kind of do that. And although, that's nice to hear and all that, at the same time, this shouldn't just be something that we put on parents of kids with learning disabilities and the educators. This should be a community thing. And in order for it to be a community thing, we need to talk about it more openly, right? Learning disabilities have always been something that we're kind of quiet about. Maybe we don't understand, so we don't talk about it, or maybe it's just hush hush because it's embarrassing, like some of my colleagues have said. So first and foremost, we need to get over that embarrassment of it. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. This is something that we should be able to talk openly about with our friends and our family. We should talk about the struggles that we face. We should talk about the things that we've had to overcome. We should talk about our successes and what has worked. If we can talk about this openly with our friends, with our neighbors, then it'll just in general become a more accepting community of people with disabilities. They won't look at them as, oh my goodness, this is something that is scary because I don't understand it. Instead, they'll say, oh, I have a friend who taught me this and now I can understand it better. So parents of kids with disabilities, faculty, and everybody just needs to start talking about it more openly, sharing their personal experiences, introducing people, and of course, educating yourself, getting to know people who are different from you, understanding different cultures, all that good stuff. By being more open-minded, we can approach this in a just a better way, and it'll be more inclusive all around.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Glines, you kind of mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to put a finer point on it. How can parents ensure that these important conversations about learning disabilities with their children aren't a one and done deal?
I think that's a very good point. I think I would like to think that we teach our children to ask questions and to be open about their concerns in terms of what as a child grows, what are some of the issues that they're facing, and to be able to bring that back to the family, bring those back to the caretakers, and have ongoing discussions. But I also think, and it's hard these days to get everybody together for dinner, but I think dinner conversations, things like having a conversation, not necessarily about a learning difference or even about neurodiversity, but about gratitude. What are you grateful for today? To put that spin on the positive piece that my fellow panelists again have mentioned, of keeping it positive, of keeping it upbeat, and that it doesn't always have to feel burdensome, but that gratitude from a neurotransmitter perspective, right? That mood lasts longer. It lasts longer than the happiness peak that peaks and then vanishes, basically. So if we can feel gratitude, I think that that's really, really important. And I think that can be a conversation rather than a specific conversation based on whatever challenges our children face. I think that's one way. I think writing journals or creating something visual, something in the expressive arts, that becomes a conversation that then can also be about how the learning challenges fit into that, or how they affect that. But it can be about a number of different issues, so that it's not really about let's focus on your learning disability. And I know that's not what anybody means, but I think that happens sometimes. So to spread out that conversation.
All right, well, thank you. And we're going to have to leave this important conversation right there. So, Dr. Roshni Patel, Dr. A.J. Marsden, and Dr. Marsha Glines, thank you for the knowledge.